Hello, guys. David Vos here, and it's a beautiful day. It's a warm, hot day, and it could be a little cooler if it would like. I wouldn't mind that. But I hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. I'm having a wonderful day. It really is a good day for me. I have spent all night last night. I didn't hardly get any sleep, and all day today up until this moment when I turn this thing on, praying and thinking and looking up questions, researching, and I have again encountered more information than I bargained for. I I'm bewildered with this information. It is so profound. And I will tell you that it's probably more information than anyone's ever had. And I have so much information in my head that I can't do it in one video. I can't do it in two videos. Maybe not even three. I don't know, because it depends. I mean, if I wanted to just rattle it off, every piece of information, just rattle it off monotonously and whatever as information, I think it would take three videos, maybe more. If I'm going to sit and talk to you as a friend and explain this to you, it's going to take a lot longer. It's going to take more. And I don't think anyone who watches this video will be disappointed. I don't think anybody could, if you watch the videos actually, instead of just looking at the title and being mad, but if you watch the video and listen, I don't think anybody could deny that what I'm about to tell you is true. And not only that, I don't think you can deny that no one's ever known this information before. Quite a bit of it I've already told you, but in the past we've talked about it, and I think a lot of you thought it was just my theories. I don't think. Well, let's put it this way. I had some of this information, but I've got a lot more now. And I've verified all of it beyond a doubt. And I've gotten some more information. And with this new information, and there does have to be a couple of tweaks. I'm thinking specifically of the Statue of Liberty. I was saying that Statue of Liberty was our Divine Mother or Mary Magdalene. I now do not believe that. I believe that statue is Apollo. And I had other well-meaning Christians tell me this, one person at least. And I had a reason to believe what I said. But no, I hadn't got it directly from the Lord or anything, It wasn't something I knew for sure, but it was just so obvious I thought it was the truth, because while the Statue of Liberty supposedly is liberty, and part of this I kind of said anyway. I've been saying something about this that was true, and if I'd have followed through with exactly what I was saying, I would have got this right. But the original Statue of Liberty was actually in Chicago, and I've done videos on this. And it had the Liberty cap. And then we talked about this, several other videos we've talked about this. How later on, after I think in 1918, they got rid of that statue and destroyed it and made a new one. And they altered one thing on it. That Liberty cap was now surrounded by a laurel wreath. I'm going to show you the meaning of that as we go along. And some of you ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Mormons and ex-this and ex-that are going to be completely flabbergasted when you find out that not only were people like Charles Taze Russell, Masons, Templars, but they were heavily, deeply involved in covering up the true Christ and liberty, and were deceivers. And unless they were complete imbeciles and didn't know what they were doing, they would have to have been evil. You know that Charles Taze Russell, when he died in a right next to a graveyard. I guess he was wandering around in a graveyard. He had a Roman toga, and they were performing rituals on Halloween, October the 31st. There's a lot going on with Russell that we're going to talk about too. There's a lot going on with Brigham Young. There's a lot going on with the KGC, which is the Knights of the Golden Circle, that killed Lincoln. We're going to retract a couple of things, but most of everything I've been saying to you, I've got now verified proof of it's all being accurate. It turns out that they got rid of that real statue and replaced it with one with a laurel wreath, which we'll show you as we go, means that they now have contained it, that liberty, within their bounds, within the bounds of their laws. And it no longer represents the liberty, but it represents the liberty of the Jacob Frank Illuminati, which is not liberalism, but it is Satanism. It's exactly what they're doing here in the United States. They're talking about the Democrats are liberals. But they're not liberals. They're not for freedom. They're for Satanism, mutilating the children. And when I say that, some of you think, oh, come on, Dave. You know, wait till you get a load of all of this. Wait till you hear all of this. Wait till you find out what these asylums are. The word asylum, you notice how all these asylums are in castles? I'm going to share with you who made them, when they were built. We now know, we were talking about yesterday, we didn't know when all these castles and the Gothic Temple of the Mormons was built and all that. We now know. And we weren't exactly right about that either. We have absolute proof now as to when all these castles and all of this architecture was built. And this is all going to come out during this series. Proof. And what they built those castles for, there's a lot of castles, hundreds of them. Some of them they built for state capitals, some of them for hospitals and asylums, orphanages and prisons and things like this. And the reason they built them as castles, Gothic style, Romanesque castles, then literally called them castles and asylums, insane asylums, is because the KGC, the Knights of the Golden Circle, which were a branch of the Templars, they had holy temple sites where they met. That's what their society did and still does. And they call their temples castles, and they call them asylums. And they have a guard, a knight, who stands at the door to guard the asylum. And inside the asylum, they do rituals to Satan. And this is why asylums and mental hospitals and prisons were created. They are literally doing rituals to Satan by murdering and abusing our people. And we'll find out who they're abusing, specifically, who all the homeless are. It has to do with the Huguenots. It has to do with the Inquisitions. It has to do with the Catholics trying to get rid of a certain group of people. Sephardic Jews and Christians. And this is going to get into the orphan trains. And I mean, I have so much to tell you, I don't know where to begin. And it's making me nervous because I want to tell you all of this, and I've got too much to tell you, and it's going to take me hours, and so I'm going to have to go slow. And you're going to have to be patient, but I don't think you're going to worry as we go along that I might not be telling you enough information quickly enough, because if I go as slow as I could possibly go, it might be too fast for you. This information is going to literally blow the lid off of what's going on. Every detail. It's going to put together all the history that we've been talking about for years now. But in a way, I can show you I can verify it with AI. I can verify it with the history books, with all these particular words and symbols and things that we'll show you in pictures. We'll be able to verify all that we're going to say. We now know what's going on, and the purpose for the AI and for this showdown and the Battle of Armageddon. Their purpose is to torture all the Christians, but they cannot. They're not allowed. Jesus Christ, his angels are watching over anybody who confesses his name. And then he will confess your name to his Father in heaven, and they can't touch you. You put the blood of the Lamb on your doorpost, and the avenging angel has to pass over, and the devil has no authority over your house. But if you ever make the agreement with the devil by joining the Babylon, joining the world, signing any paper, or going to the doctor and signing over your life, they can kill you. And they won't just kill you, they will torture you. And this is what they're doing. This is why all these people have got AIDS, and they're being tortured. This is why the Africans are told they got to sign little waivers, and then if they'll give their blood, they'll give them money, and then they are allowed to kill them and torture them. This is what's going on with the asylums. Parents are lured into a style of life that leads them into luxury and debauchery. They're drunk. They're out of their mind on drugs. They've given up their life. They've got no hope. They're depressed. They've given up on morality. They have no integrity. And when their children go crazy and start breaking windows, they sign them over to the government, and they take them to asylums, and they torture them. This is what's going on in California. And we're going to go through the whole entire history. If you see on the page there's the watchtower, the early watchtower. On the left side, you see the crown and the cross. That is the Masonic Templar Knights of the Golden Circle symbol. But if you look on the right side, you see a knight with two emblems. One is a sword, a long sword, and with the other one, some kind of a battle axe. And that particular symbol, that knight, when it's joined with the cross and the crown, is the KGC symbol, the Knights of the Golden Circle, who are the people who built all the castle-like structures that became prisons and asylums, hospitals, courthouses that have dungeons underneath, all across. And they're related to the Lone Star, which is where they started off. They had a whole system where were taking control of South America and Mexico and the southern states. So we're going to go through so much stuff that, again, I'm getting lost in just where to begin and how to tell you all of this. We need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to, well, I'm going to try to stick with American history, but we're going to go before 1776, and we're going to talk about Chicago. Chicago is French. And the New Franca was actually here before the British, as well as the New Spain and the New Scotia. The New Franca, well, and so what I was going to say is that, so we're going to stick kind of with American history, but we're going to have to go from time to time back deeper, all the way back to John Dee and Galileo and Newton and, Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, King James, because we're going to have to touch on why all these things occurred from the very beginning. We're going to have to go back to the Stuart line, the Merovingian line. We're going to have to go back to the Tsars of Russia and the Vlad the Impaler and the Rothschilds and the infiltration of the British Parliament, Queen Victoria and the British Empire and the 007 and the John Dee. We've covered a lot of that. We're going to go back from time to time and make little points. But let's basically be talking here about American history. We're not taught about American history in this country. We're never told why any of these buildings are literally called castles. We're never told that the KGC literally built meeting temples for themselves called castles, that they used that exact architecture, and that they were called asylums. We're never told that they were knights that guarded their ritualistic satanic rituals. We're never told the desire, how it goes back to Jacob Frank, who was Jewish, who combined with Adam Weishaupt and the Rothschilds, who funded it, and who became the Jacobin movement in France, that Benjamin Franklin was chosen to head up in the United States, him and Voltaire. Voltaire was anointed or initiated by Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was the headmaster of the whole Illuminati. Because the Illuminati came in and infiltrated. Illuminati was 1776 in Bavaria, but they came down into France and took that over and ran the people of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene out. Those were the Huguenots. Well, they did it several times with the Waldensians, then later the Spanish Inquisition, and then after that in the 1700s, they started running out the Huguenots, and they went to America and the Ottoman Empire. That's why they had a war, and World War I and II was a lot about the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire at that time had control of Israel. And that's a whole other aspect of this, where all these people went. But the majority of these individuals that had any influence, when they ran them out of Spain and France, the Huguenots, they went to Britain, to Scotland, and to Wales. And they became very important people there. And they were good people. And they kept the traditions of the Languedoc with them, and the traditions of true liberty and the liberty cap. They migrated over. St. Clair into Nova Scotia, discovered Nova Scotia, and that was the new Scotland. And the Scottish Rite, which is not anything to do with modern Masonry or Illuminati. This was the original teachings. They were not the evil, dark occult of today. They only had 3 degrees, and they were only degrees that you were initiated into the mysteries of Christ, and you were baptized, and you were knighted, which meant you were a priest. So these other people stole all of this, infiltrated it. We'll explain all of it and how they did it. So the good guys came to America and established, not interestingly enough, New Franca, even though they were originally French, or from the Languedoc, from Marseille, France, and Montpellier. When they got to New England, that's why they made this huge New England, Vermont capital of Montpellier, because that's where they were from. Montpellier is from France. And so the Cajuns were from there. Canada is the same word. It comes from the French. And that's why you got French Quebec. Well, they ruled Chicago up until about the time of the World Fair. So at that time, they would not, these were the Catholic French. They were the French that weren't really the French, the ones who drove out the true French. The children of Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ, they became English and Scottish. And they were deeply aware of the battle, a life and death battle between Christ and Satan. They had been run out of everywhere they'd been with the Waldensians and then the Spanish Inquisition and the Huguenots, and they knew their only and last and final stand was not to battle and defeat them, because it could have been an eternal battle. And I guarantee the good guys could have wiped out the bad guys over and over again. But the bad guys kept coming back. They're very, very devout. These Jews, they worship their devil with a lust that is impervious to any wisdom or light that might crack through their little brow. They are many times more faithful to Satan than Christians are to Christ. And they are intent on establishing their kingdom of Yahweh again, which is slavery and enslaving all the Gentiles and making us like dogs again and using us as sex slaves, owning everything, buying them up their world and, sectioning it off. They get to own everything. They're the manners. They're the masters. They're the owners. Baal worship, the owner, which is the law of slavery that Paul says, ye who want to be under law, do you not read in the law? It is slavery. Don't go back to this. It's apostasy, like a dog to its vomit. But they are intent to go back to it. And they don't tell you that they know that their deity is the devil. They know this very well. And they know that they've done so much evil, they don't think they can be forgiven. They don't realize Jesus is very, very merciful. And that the Lord will bring them to their knees and they will confess one day. But in the meantime, they are seared in their conscience. And they are literally doing everything they can. They want vengeance. That's what their deity wants, vengeance, because he believes that Jesus is coming to torture them. Remember, in the Bible it says, if you come to torture us before our time, they don't want that. And the only thing they can do is torture us and eventually get revenge on the Lord's children. But they know they have no authority or power over us unless we consent. So this is what they do. They have a system of deception. So the Huguenots went to Wales, Britain, Scotland, and they became master masons, the good ones. Because remember, Jesus was a carpenter, or a tekton. That's the Greek word, tekton. And it doesn't mean a carpenter. It means a master architect, tekton. And there's a lot of that we've never been told. So Jesus is the master mason. And masonry is not wrong, but today it is. Anybody involved with any organization, any political position, any king, ruler, authority, nurse, doctor, politician, anybody, the Pied Piper, an actor, or somebody that's making your food is committing a sin. Even a cook, if they're using poisons to cook it with. Unless they're out in the garden using herbs, they're committing a sin. Everything in this world is of the devil. The only way to get free and wash our hands of it all is to get out of her, my people. And that means to literally get out of it. We do not buy and sell. We do not participate in their sins, that we might not partake of her plagues. I'm sorry. This may sound very harsh, but when you understand it, you will begin to realize that there's only one solution, or else we all die. We either follow them to the grave, or we learn what's going on and what they're doing and their schemes, and we overcome them by the word of our witnessing. So they went there and they came to America to establish in the colonies the kingdom of Christ. They made a constitution, and we'll talk about how that was done by divine miracle. If it had not been for Christ, it would not have been done. There was a secret individual there at the signing of the Bill of Rights, a man with a hat and a cloak that came in and gave a speech, because the people that were there were all afraid to sign it because they knew they'd be murdered. Well, this man walked in with this coat, this cloak, and this hat, and the man was, they claim, Francis Bacon, who they claim lived forever. Some say he was the guy that wrote Shakespeare. He's the guy that wrote the Bible, the King James Version. His brother was King James. Have you ever wondered, is he a good guy or a bad guy? The occult says he's a wonderful man. Well, Manly P. Hall wrote about him. They say it was their side coming in to make sure, like an angel, like a special envoy of the angels and deity, to make sure that constitution was signed. And in fact, it was. But they don't want you to know that Sir Francis Bacon was not of their ilk. That's the part they don't tell you. They twist a lot of this stuff. They want you to think Benjamin Franklin, Voltaire was good. Benjamin Franklin was the literal puppet master commissioned by Adam Weishaupt, Jacob Frank, and the Illuminati in France after they'd driven out the Huguenots. And that Statue of Liberty that they brought over is indeed Apollo, and this is why we have the Apollo mission, and everything's about the destruction and Shiva, and it's all, everything in the world today is controlled by them. The last thing that the good people did, they murdered the last martyr in Joseph Smith, who, by the way, did not wear any beard or have anything to do with these occultists, but they've blasphemed his name and said he did. They claimed he had to do with polygamy and all of this, only to make people think that it's okay because the prophet did it. But it's all lies, and you could easily find that out if you did any research and just looked at it and stopped just blindly listening to what they said. His teacher was Abraham Jonas, who was born in England and was one of these Sephardic Jewish Huguenots that was battling with Sinclair, Arthur Sinclair, Arthur Sinclair is the guy that discovered Nova Scotia, but his descendant was a man named Sinclair that was the last of the Constitutional Congress. And he willingly laid down his power as the president of this country and handed it over to Washington, who was his right-hand man. They were good guys. They were establishing the Sinclair bloodline goes back to the Stuart line. We'll explain all of this and how they came down and decided that their lineage was not to take power, but to give it to the people. I mean, this has been done before by Peter Waldo in the Waldensian Inquisition. He gave up all of his power, money, and all the great riches of the empire, going all the way back to Mary Magdalene, whose descendants owned Egypt and Persia and Russia and Rome and all the world, Middle East, along with Jesus Christ as King of the world. They had all the gold and the jewels and the power. They had it all in treasures. The knights, Joseph of Arimathea and his 10 mines and all this power and money. But they didn't use it for evil. They used it to give it to the people. They built temples and libraries and parks and roads and everything for the people. And so Peter Waldo, when they were trying to murder him, they wanted all that wealth. Before they could come and nab him, he gave it all to the people, and they loved him. Just as Christ and Julius Caesar gave all that they had to the people and built libraries and roads, and he was considered a great hero by the people. So when they came in to take Peter Waldo, they found that all of the wealth was scattered around the country and millions of people had it. It was a communal wealth. It wasn't one man they could just take it from. It wasn't written on a banknote somewhere in a bank. It was the land, the jewels, the wealth, everything was divided up amongst the people. Not all of it. There was a great deal of wealth. I mean, in the form of gold, like maybe it was like the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, jewels, certain manuscripts and artifacts and things that maybe books that will be opened in the last days. All of that was taken by the knights, and it was taken several different places. It was taken to Ethiopia, it was taken to different places, but eventually they took it to America, and they landed on the west coast off of Baja California. They came onto the land. They named everything after John, Mary, and all the Peter and the apostles and Paul. Went up the Gila River and all the way the Gila River to where I live in Cibola County, which is the 7 cities of gold that Cordova was looking for. And the 7 cities of gold were actually 7 caves. And the United States government's actually found one of them. And they got billions of dollars of gold out of there. So all of that treasure is still waiting to be unearthed, but mostly it's artifacts that will open up all the divine truth and the history and the sciences, and it will bring world peace when we finally are able to do that kind of thing. Like Joseph Smith, who found the golden plates. This is part of it. And the location of this place is actually in the Book of Mormon. It was a mountain that they speak of that is where the Lamanite border with the Nephites is, and we found out from other different things that that's here in Cibola County. And that's why Cordova came here looking for the 7 cities of gold. He didn't find them because they weren't cities, they were 7 caves. Now, the reason they called it that might have been a couple of reasons, but it came from the 7 cities that was in the Languedoc. They called it Septimania, or the 7 cities. And so they brought all that gold from Mary Magdalene, Jesus Christ, and brought it here to the free and new Zion, is what they called it, the New Jerusalem. There was actually some of it that was captured and stolen by the Knights of the Golden Circle. That is some of the money they used to finance the Civil War, and that's another long story that we could get into. But back to this Waldensian Inquisition. So what they did is they went in from house to house and started ransacking the people of the Waldensians, of the people of Waldo. And they ran them out. And they forbade that religion of freedom and that liberty. But they safeguarded that liberty, and they kept that liberty cap with them, which started there. And you'll find that liberty cap up there in the Ottoman Empire where they sent them, and up with the people that went to Wales and Scotland. And you'll find that liberty cap in Chicago on that statue, the original Statue of Liberty, that they put the laurel wreath around. You notice they got a laurel wreath around the UN and around our flags. And I'll show you here that Charles Russell has a laurel wreath around the cross and the crown. And what do you think that means? It goes back to the Holy Roman Empire that used that laurel wreath to surround their enemies and to declare victory. Anything inside of that laurel wreath they have power over. So they put it around our flag. They put it around the UN. The whole world is under their control. And they're putting it specifically, it all started off, they would put it around the cross and the crown. Because they're not declaring the Christ. They're declaring they are the knights of the golden circle, or the crown. And that means they own Jesus, and they have power over him, and they have imprisoned him in their own physical bodily control of the carnal nature. They have victory. You know how we're supposed to get victory over the beast and his image? They believe that they've got to get victory over Christ. And this is why Charles Taze Russell was evil. There's no way he could not have known that the symbolisms, well, he had to have been initiated very highly in these organizations, and they knew what they were doing. And this is why he also has a tower, the Watchtower, which is on the tarot deck, and it has reference to this demonic evil wickedness that they're perpetrating in the world. And the Knights Templars, even though originally a knight was a priest and goes back to Mary Magdalene, they're using it and infiltrating all of this, turning everything upside down and backwards. And they're laughing and mocking us. They don't teach that Christ is divine. What they try to make you think is that only Jesus is divine. Well, if Jesus is our elder brother, and he partook of flesh and blood as did his brethren, and learned by the things in which he suffered, see, they know that, so they want to turn that around and make you think, oh, he was just a man then. What they don't want you to understand is that it is the human race that is divine. And Jesus is our elder brother, and he is truly divine, of the divine, one and equal with his Father, as we all are equal, and we're all one in Christ. But they take that divinity of man away. They confuse it and hide it in some kind of crazy, weird doctrine called the Trinity. Even though the Trinity is absolutely true. It's a symbol, but it's not what they say it is. It doesn't mean that there are just these 3 beings in the universe hovering around in yonder heaven and they're all deity and you're not. They don't teach the divine nature in man and the omniscience of deity. They've made it into some weird kind of strange formula. You either believe Jesus is God or you don't believe that any God or something. Or you believe Yahweh's God, the devil, right? It's crazy what they've done to deceive the world. And then when they portray a cross and a crown, they make you think they're for Christ. Or they display a American flag, they make you think they're for the Constitution. But it's surrounded by a laurel wreath, and they go, ha ha ha, you don't realize it, but you've been fooled. Brigham Young also has that same crazy look, the same beard style as Charles Russell. Brigham Young was another one of the offshoots of this KGC, or the Knights of this Golden Circle. They all use this crown, this golden circle, and they were all knights or priests, and they were all building these Gothic castles throughout America, especially in the West, and turning them into prisons and castles and asylums for all of you. And anybody who goes up the ranks and does what they're told in their priesthood gets to be a polygamist or have orgies, or, I'll never forget when I went to Blackfoot. It's very crazy. It's going to take some time to get all this out. I mean, I've got a lot to tell you, but I got to stop and tell you a story. And I'm not going to go into the complete details or tell you who I went to save, because for one, we don't have time to get into this story real deep, but I looked up online to see if I could get a picture of it, and I can't really find a picture of it unless I think this is it. It's the only one I could find, and I asked AI, and they said they won't let you have pictures of it, for whatever reason. And then that's the one that, it was supposed to be patterned after the one in Oregon. I think that's the one in Oregon, but this is ridiculously crazy, although I don't remember it looking like that when I was there, so I don't know if that was the one or not. There was a really important individual in my life that the government stole and drugged them to a faraway area. I'd never even heard of Blackfoot, Idaho, in the middle of nowhere. I had to do a lot of figuring and research to find out where they had taken this person. I found out they had taken him to an insane asylum against their will, completely bogus, and they did it because they could get to this person, and probably so that they could get to me. So I found him, and I went to this place, and it was this huge, dark Gothic castle, a huge castle. You go to the door, and it's literally like you're entering a castle, like a moat and everything, and you bang on the door with this metal knocker, and somebody, like a knight, answers. And when you walk into the entrance, you see this cage. You walk through the door, it's a big rock, stone cut, quarried from nearby canyons or something. This isn't brick. This wasn't stucco. This was a real castle. This is all created by masons. And they built it entirely. You have to ask yourself, why would they do this for the insane? They built these things for the insane. That's why they built them. Or hospitals or whatever. Some of them were made into prisons and different things. You say, well, why would they do this? You'd think they'd be more interested in building these huge structures for libraries and helping the good people rather than building these crazy, dark, evil places to house the insane, who really aren't insane. They just take people, and all the American people just go, oh, well, they were insane. They took them away. We just forget about them. Yeah, they were acting a little weird, so, they got them. Ha ha! And nobody goes and helps. Nobody does anything. So I walked in, and there's my friend in this cage. And I mean, sitting in a chair in a dark iron cage like as if it were a bird to be viewed by the public. Everybody would walk around the cage and taunt this person. They were trying to make them angry. They were hissing and banging and crawling around and screaming and trying to get out. And I went to the cage and I said, listen, I'll get you out of here. These guys have no power. And I demanded that they let this person out. And they said, no, you can't. Who are you? And I said, listen, you better take me to the people responsible, and you better do it now. So they said, just a minute. And they went up these steps, and they were just like dungeon solid stone steps that wound around into the next floor of the castle. And it wound around several stories and went up to the apex of the castle. But I couldn't see it at that point. They came back down and said, follow me. And I went up this long, windy stairs and ended up at the top of the castle in this big room. And there was these windows where they could look out over the valley. When I got to the top of the stairs, there were, I didn't count them. I don't remember how many there were, but like about 12 men in white robes. They looked like they were just been performing some ritual. And I had just come down from the cage where my friend was screaming and writhing in pain emotionally, trying to get out. And I went up there and I said, you need to let my friend out and you need to do it now. And they just looked at me as calm. I mean, these guys had no expression. It was not a legal thing. It was a spiritual thing. I looked them straight in the eye. I did not let them intimidate me one bit. I said, you will let them out. And I started preaching to them about Jesus Christ. And I said, you will pay for what you are doing. And you have no authority over my friend. And I began to speak the words of Christ and denounce Satan and denounce their actions. I spoke as if Christ was there in the room with me, because he was. And all of my angels were with me. And I knew that they knew it. And they knew they had no legal authority to do what they were doing. And the only way they could do it is if we consented. But I did not consent. Well, they went down, walked me down, opened up. They had this big key and they opened up the cage and they let my friend out. And I walked out of there with my friend. That is unheard of. People don't do that. It's probably the strangest story you've ever heard, but it's the truth. And the reason it happened is because you do not have to be afraid of Satan. And it is not about anything that these people on earth can do. They have no legal authority over anyone who believes in Jesus and confesses his name. And that is a true story, and it is a real story, and you all have to listen to what I'm saying, because that's what's going to save you. It saved me then. It saved me at other times I've used this procedure. I never back down to the devil when I know I'm right. Now, if I've done something wrong, I apologize. If I've done something that I need to be corrected for, or that I know I have a consequence coming for, that's a completely different thing. But even then, I can go to my Father in heaven and ask for forgiveness, or I can ask the person who's done this that they would go and ask for forgiveness, and the Lord will forgive us. And then we proceed to speak the word, and as if in a legal courtroom, declare our rights, because we know that the Lord has forgiven us. We know that there is no legal right for Satan. They have no legal right to hold us, to persecute us, to even touch us. But we have to stand on the rights that we have as Christians. And this is what's going to be going on. And this is why they're doing all of this. Because they have to make it look real. They have to scare you. They have to intimidate you. And they have to get you to join the system. If you don't go to a doctor, they can't kill you. If you don't go to the city and get involved in their shenanigans, they haven't got any right to take you away, arrest you, or detain you. You are a sovereign citizen. However, it doesn't work that you can claim to be a sovereign citizen and still be in their domain. You must get out of their domain for it to be legal. And I don't mean legal with them. I mean legal with the real authority on this earth, which is Jesus Christ, who runs the world. And Satan is the deity of this world, but this world is and must be in subjection to Christ. All power in heaven and upon earth was given to Jesus Christ. And that is a fact. If you believe that, if you know that, you are free. You've been set free. And even if you make a mistake, accidentally or impulsively, the Lord will forgive you. You don't have to say, oh, well, I deserve it because I did something wrong. No. We're children of the Lord. We cannot sin because his seed remains in us. And we are children of the deity. And as long as we love, and that's how we know, if you have love, then you are a child of the living deity. And the devil has no authority over you. So this is what you're going to have to learn. This is why it's important that we listen to this video and understand all of these particulars. What you're seeing on the screen here is in the dark green, that's all the territory that the CGK, or the Knights of the Golden Circle, that's how much area that they took over early on. Now they abandoned this idea of taking over certain parts of the world. They moved into organizations and political societies and their little tentacles are everywhere. They're in control of Jehovah's Witnesses. Modern Mormons is a branch of the Golden Circle. It is a satanic, evil circle of devil worshippers. And they are slowly taking over the world, and they've got AI now that they're bringing on, and the purpose for that is to deceive the entire world and anybody who believes in them and signs their life over by being intimidated and believing and just thinking that, okay, I guess there's aliens. Okay, I guess the doctors are God. We got to do what they say or we're going to die. We got to take the pill. We got to sign right here. If you do what they say, they can kill you and they will. But if you stand firm in your faith and tell them, as Jesus did, get thee behind me, Satan, they have no authority. But if you look in the United States, you'll see that there are two types of architecture. And you wouldn't know it because nobody ever tells you. There is only two types of architecture. Actually, four. You could say there's the stucco Spanish style. That was from an earlier time when the Spanish Cordova came over from Spain and Portugal. There was about 300 castle-like structures that were built in the western part of the United States. You might remember Napa Valley. That was basically what they built as insane asylums, and there were orphanages there, I think. Why were there so many orphanages there? Why was there all of these insane asylums that were being built? Why did they make them so gothic and unescapable and so vicious looking, intimidating? Why do they wear these white robes when you walk up and they look like priests? Why are they torturing our children? And then you have another group of buildings that were made very smooth and white with pillars, Greco-Roman style. Chicago was a Greco-Roman style city. So you've got the Greco-Roman style, the Spanish style, the Gothic Romanesque style, and then in modern times we have the glass towers. But in Chicago, we have this Greco-Roman, very beautiful city. It had an obelisk, just like Rome does, and New York had one. Wherever they wanted to make a kind of a headquarters or a capital area, they would always have a downtown, looks like the Vatican. They would have a dome. That's the temple. Then they would have a big waterfront, usually a rectangle or square. That is the baptismal font. At the other end of that, they have an obelisk, which is the male sex symbol. These go back to the ancient temples. They are not using them in the way that they were originally built. They were usually monuments, and they were ancient symbols and fertility rites, but they were wholesome and they were completely different than what the occult today is using them for. They have usurped all of this. They don't know what they're doing. But in that area where the water is, there's this huge circle that goes around it, and you see at one end the capital in Chicago. And at the other end, you see this statue. It looks like the Statue of Liberty, but it's quite a bit different. It's not holding up a torch, and it doesn't have a crown of 7 beams of light like the sun or Apollo, but which is not light. They try to tell you it's light and truth, but Apollo is the descending sun, the Antichrist, Satan. But it had the Liberty Cap in one hand, and the Liberty Cap had no laurel wreath. And when they came in the 1893 World Fair there, they literally came to burn it down. Why? Because it was built by their enemy. These were the devils that came in. They did it to St. Louis, Buffalo, all that whole area, because it was settled by not the Catholic New Franco or even the Spanish Cordova and the Mexico area, or even the Scotland, the New Scotland area. And it wasn't the British. This was just before World War I, where they had seized almost complete control. And they were seizing that control from a group of individuals that were the original founding fathers that came down from England, Scotland, George Washington, Sinclair, as we said, the Constitutional Congress. They went by a type of law before the Constitution, before our present system. They went by a system of government from the Languedoc area of France, southern France, which was called bourgeoisie, or some pronounce it bourgeoisie. It was a government that was kind of a group of the wealthy and the educated, non-noble class of individuals, but merchants, lawyers. They were master craftsmen. And they lived in the Languedoc cities of Montpellier. That's why they had Montpellier as the capital of Vermont. And Toulouse. They were the bourgeoisies. They were very powerful, but they entirely and completely rejected the total feudal control of Paris, which was a monarchy set up by the Catholic Church. They rejected Catholicism. They wanted to be under the Cathar liberty. So it was southern France. It was operated under written Roman civil law. So they did have some laws, but it was laws that were contractual, and it was completely separate from feudal law and prisons and all of this harshness. It was a liberty and freedom where it was ruled basically by the people. And they didn't believe in kings. They rejected the Catholic king, as they would say. So it was a religion based on this ancient Languedoc back to Mary Magdalene and Christ Jesus. The Continental Congress established it. Remember, the last of these continental presidents of Congress was Sinclair, who was a direct descendant of Sinclair, who discovered Nova Scotia. And they discovered this area in Nova Scotia and the French Quebec, and they had all of that power. But the Catholics came in right away and made the New Franca. They were not the same. They were the Catholics. They had already run them out of France, and then when they came down from Britain and Wales and Scotland to America, they came over and took over that whole area. So when Washington originally took over, the first thing he did was to get the Northwest Territories, which would be the area up around that area. And so 1776, right after when they established the Bill of Rights and so forth, and Washington became the president of the United States of America, they established the Northwest Territories, and they then had in their possession again, they took it back. So the Huguenot British Scottish people from that area that came in originally, probably 1500s or earlier, they established this area, and they had Chicago. But then the New Franco individuals that run them out of France, that were called French, but they weren't French. They were the ones that ran the real French out. They came over and made New Franca, wouldn't let Protestants or Huguenots in, and they started then running Chicago for some time until Washington came along and established the Northwest Territories and took that back, which it had originally been these British individuals that were French. They were Huguenots that built Chicago, that had the Liberty Cap. You can see the Liberty Cap. You know who they were. But these Catholic French that weren't French, they came into France, got rid of the good guys, and established this other Kabbalistic Jewish system, or Illuminati. And their capital was basically in Paris. They were Catholics, and they wouldn't allow any Protestants into that area of New Franca. Well, once George Washington took over, that ended. And they took back Chicago. Well, that only lasted a short time until World War I, then the big reset. And they had the Federal Reserve again. So they lost control. The bad guys lost control to the Constitution. They gained control because they sent individuals in like Benjamin Franklin, Voltaire, and Thomas Jefferson, who were spies for this evil Illuminati. And they knew they could not stop the movement. But they knew also, remember what Benjamin Franklin said? He says, you've got a constitution if you can keep it. Because they were basically mocking us and smirking, saying, you'll never be able to keep it. They had to relinquish that power because, you see, they had no authority. Good men like Washington and Sinclair, John Adams, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln stood up for the principles of liberty. And when people stand up to the devil, he has no power. They had to relinquish and sign it and give us the Constitution. But they said, if you can keep it, because they planned on stirring us up through luxury, through intimidation, by getting us involved in a deception where we would literally have birth certificates and sign away our freedoms, no longer be sovereign citizens. And the banks would come out. You see, after the Civil War, they bankrupted us. Then they basically owned us. After the Civil War, they created the birth certificates, and the Emancipation Act was just a fake. Instead of getting rid of slavery, they adopted slavery nationwide. And by that time, Washington was gone. They assassinated Lincoln, and they assassinated Joseph Smith, who was the pupil and the chosen leader of that movement to take the gospel and the New Jerusalem. We're going to go out west and build the New Jerusalem, because they were trying to get away from any of these people like the banks and the slavery. The southern states wanted slavery and the banks and all this evil. So it was a battle. It was a spiritual battle. And when we won the Civil War, because we were patriots, they didn't bat an eyelash. They just infiltrated deeper. They started moving towards a federal bank, and they started infiltrating our Congress like they did earlier in 1688 with Parliament and Queen Victoria. So they always keep on going. They never give up. They always keep going. So originally, Chicago was made by these Huguenots, descendants of Mary Magdalene with the Liberty Cap. The New Franca, the bad French came over, created this New Franca Catholic French area, and didn't let any Protestants in, and created a feudal state. Then they created the Constitution to protect themselves in the New England area. And Abraham Jonas, a Sephardic Jew who was completely and radically opposed to Benjamin Franklin, Voltaire, who were agents like 007, just like John D., 007. They were agents of the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, and Jacob Frank. That was the Jacobin movement. Now, if you look that up, they'll say that they called it the Jacobin movement because they met on a street called Jacob, but it wasn't actually called Jacob. It was like Jacobesque or something. Well, that's not true. That's not why they call it the Jacobin movement. At the very same time this Jacobin movement was going on, there was a man named Jacob Frank, and it was the Jacob movement, and it was the Illuminati, and they were financed by the Rothschilds, and they infiltrated the Masons, the Templars, and so forth, and created groups like the KGC or the Knights of the Golden Circle. And then when that failed, they created, and they merged with the Lone Star group because they were trying to take over South America and the whole area. This is why a lot of buildings and courthouses and things like that and prisons in Texas look like castles because they were really big there. And then they branched out all the way up into New Mexico and, up into Utah. And their other branch was the Brigham Young branch. And they also built Gothic buildings and castles. Brigham Young built this huge Gothic temple in Salt Lake, Manti, Logan. They had big cathedral-like buildings. I don't even think they were temples, but like in Paris. Now, they literally called this little town of 500 people Paris. And they'll say it was because some guy's name was Paris, but his name was Perris. It wasn't named after him. It was named after Paris, France, because they were of that Jacobin movement. All of them had the beard with no mustache, just like Charles Russell, Brigham Young. They were literally offshoots of the Templars and then the KGC, and then the Mormons are one offshoot, the Ku Klux Klan, Albert Pike, they were all together, but different sections of the same group. They created Jehovah's Witnesses. They brought a lot of Germans in, made Hollywood. They made their castles that were built by the KGC. They called them asylums. They did their ritual practices on the suspecting people. So in the northeastern area, when the New Franco individuals were persecuting the Huguenots, and they had the French-Indian War, the Huguenot British French, the real French, sided with the British. Not because they were really for the British, but because they tried to defeat these Catholic French that were the ones that actually drove them out of France. They did everything in their power to defeat them. And in fact, they did stab it off quite a bit. But in the end, in the Indian-Frank War, they did end up defeating them. That's why they ended up having to make the Constitution. But before the Constitution came, what they did was they ended up making all these poor individuals in the war ended up dying. The Huguenots, a lot of them died and left their children orphans. So those Catholic New Frankians took those orphans and they took them to Louisiana and they raised them and they indoctrinated them to be Catholics because they were trying to stamp out this Catharism, this liberalism, this true liberty and justice for all. And they just about did it. To this day, people don't even know what happened. All these orphan trains and all these asylums were them making laws to put the good people who they didn't like it because they wouldn't join with the Catholic New Frank War. They refused to join up there in Canada. So they stole all their children and they made them orphans and took them to Louisiana. And they raised them as Catholics and took their parents and put them in asylums. They weren't even crazy. And they started building them, took them out west. And some of the Huguenots went west, went to California and out west. And when they got there, they made laws. It was like the wild, wild west. And so people were just doing whatever they got to do. And they were just rounding people up and putting them in insane asylums. And they weren't insane. Just like they're doing today in California. They've got millions of homeless. This is something they've been doing for a long time. This is all a concerted effort to destroy the people that remembered Christ and remembered the liberty of Christ. But I want to tell you the story from here tomorrow. And, if we can get back to it tomorrow, I've got other things to do around here. But this is what we're going to be doing, this series. We're going to tell the story, the whole story, nothing but the truth, so help us deity. All of it you've never heard before. The whole history of our country, of Chicago, of the New Franca, New Nova Scotia, of the Continental Congress, everything that they did and how they went out west and how the Knights of the Golden Circle infiltrated everything and built their castles, put their prisons and insane asylums and created all their Satanism and their prisons and orphanages and their rock and roll and their Hollywood, the drugs on the streets, the welfare, their violence, their poison foods, the whole thing. Pharmaceutical companies, their evil plot, how it developed. We're going to talk about Benjamin Franklin and the Nine Sisters that was over there in the lodge. It was over in France. It was taken over by the Illuminati and Jacob Frank and David Westop. The Rothschilds financed it. They infiltrated the Masons. They brought Jefferson and Voltaire and Benjamin Franklin to spy out our freedom over here and to work and connive until they could assassinate Lincoln and get the Federal Reserve and start instituting this debauchery and crime and drug running and just slowly debilitate our minds and our children and our lives until we would just willingly lay down and die because they have no authority to murder us. And we'll find out what their plan is, how it goes back to this Illuminati and what their ultimate plan is. If we understand what they were doing then, what they've been doing, then we'll understand what they're about to do and what this AI is and what their purpose is, what their goal is. They've done it several times. The French Revolution, they burned the Bibles and stood a woman on a platform, a prostitute, naked or something, and all got down and worshiped her. This is their liberty. That's their liberty. It's this mutilation and debauchery and Satanism, like they started over in the United States with Hollywood and the rock and roll and the pharmaceutical and the mental health stuff and the chemicals in the food. And their ultimate goal is to get us dumbed down where we finally give up our children and our freedoms, and we will give up our Constitution willingly and sign at the bottom line, agree to go on AI and give up our souls And then they're going to have this big purge. They've done it several times where they just go around murdering Christians. They've done it in the Ukraine. Stalin did it. And they've done it in Poland. And Hitler did it. And they've done it in China with Mao. And they've done it in Africa and Mozambique and all these other different places in South Africa. The creation of the AIDS viruses and all of these things with Marx and all of these other Darwin and everything is an effort to destroy us. And they're going to have a great signs and wonders and fearful sights from heaven. And it's going to be the greatest deception you can imagine. And what it's for is to get everybody to worship the beast. And you got to do it willingly. If you don't participate, you won't share in her sins or partake of her plagues. But they're getting to the point where they're going to have everybody, when they get hungry, they'll stand in line and sign their soul over to get a little food. Once you sign it, once you agree, then they can murder you and torture you and your children. So you have to stand firm and you have to understand what's about to happen, because they have no authority if you don't agree to it. But you got to get out of Babylon. But we'll get back to this tomorrow. And you know the Lord loves you. His grace and His peace will be with you guys. And we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.